Hi, I'm Cindy Jennings, a strategic personal planner. My interviews are meant to offer insights from experts for business owners thinking about selling their business, something many of us only do once, and having the right advisors is key. Speaking of keys, in today's interview, I sit down with Julie Keys, a business advisor and exit planning expert, and we dive into the intersection of business advising and planning for life beyond the sale. We explore why business owners need a strong team of advisors like financial experts, CPAs, and business attorneys, and why planning your exit a few years in advance is critical for success. Julie shares insights into the unique challenges women also face when selling their businesses and how emotions play a role for everyone in the process. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or just curious about navigating transitions, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Julie, thanks so much for being here. You are at the intersection of business advising and exit planning, which makes me so excited to talk to you today. And my first question for you is DIY versus going to advisors. So I have seen both in my experience, and when they tend to go DIY, I see them because they don't know advisors exist or what advisors exist to help them. Can you talk about your experience and then how you tend to talk to your clients about DIY versus tapping into a network of advisors?
Yeah, I think entrepreneurs are trailblazers by nature a lot of times. And so DIY does not scare them. But yet at the same time, not having outside advice can definitely damage what their ultimate outcome could be for their exit. Because let's face it, the vast majority of owners going through the process have never been through it before. So when I find myself going through something that I've never been through before, I'm going to look to people who have or who advise people through that process so that I don't mess it up. And when you think about it, it's your nest egg, generally speaking, if you're a business owner, that you have put a lot of time and energy and blood and sweat and tears into, right? Lots of sacrifice. And usually you have one shot at doing it right. Not always. Sometimes you get a second bite of the apple, but for the vast majority of owners, it's going to be a one-time deal. And so we definitely don't want to jeopardize that. So I do what I can to change it. And there are, like, you could sprinkle in just when you've never been through something before, then maybe it doesn't even occur to you, about who you might need to help you. And so, if this is the situation that you find yourself in as an owner, whoever your listeners are, I'm assuming a lot of them are owners, some of them are advisors, I'm sure. So talk to your business owner colleagues, because we tend to hang out with people that have the same issues that we have, right? When I was an entrepreneur for many years, before I became an advisor and then an exit planner, so yeah, like you said, the two together, I sought out other business owners to talk to and get advice from and make connections with, which is where I met a lot of the advisors that I worked with as an owner. And so if you find yourself not having those advisors that like, and trust, then you got to find new ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation for people you're working with? Like, is there, and I've read your book, so I'm sort of leading the witness here, right? But like, so the core people that you recommend to have around you as a business owner in general, I know every situation is different,
Sure.
and then how you might expand that based on different situations.
Sure. Well, in my opinion, the most important person at the table is the financial advisor. And I'm not a financial advisor, but the financial advisor is really the advisor that the business owner should consider to be their primary confidant, the person that knows them best, not just professionally, but personally, because the financial advisor is helping them with not only their investment decisions today, but to help them map out their financial preparedness and maintaining their lifestyle, And so if a person's going to maintain their lifestyle, then they need the advice of someone who can help them financially plan that out and map that out. Like, am I going to have enough? And if I don't, How much longer do I need to run my business, and what is it worth today, and what do I need to sell it for, and all of those things. Really, so much of that conversation is had with a financial advisor, and they're there after we all go away. After the business has been sold, you don't need, the robust accounting advisory services. You don't need the attorneys, but you definitely need good CPAs at the table too, right? Not just somebody that does your taxes. We're talking about someone who can actually help you with budgets and projections and normalizing your financials and helping you plan out your cash flow and obviously tax advice, not just now, but when the time comes for you to transition. So financial advisor, CPA, and then of course we need lawyers. We need a business lawyer. If you haven't had your business run through any kind of audit, a legal audit in the past, then it would probably be money well spent to get your whatever it is that you've got documented or not documented up to date, your corporate minutes, your buy-sell agreements, your shareholder agreements, your key person retention agreements, whatever the agreements are and contracts that you have in place or don't have in place that you should have. An attorney can help you to get your legal house in order. So we're getting our financial house in order. We're getting our accounting house in order with at least a review, maybe a compilation on the financial side of the business. And then we're going to get our legal house in order. So those three things are the primary. Now, if you're a family business and you're thinking that you'd like to sell to a family member, you want to carry on the legacy, maybe you've got children who work in the business. And so there are a lot of different aspects of family business readiness that would go alongside just regular exit planning. So we're not eliminating the need for the CPA or the attorneys or the financial advisor at all. We definitely need them, but sometimes you need a family business expert. If you don't have any governance like rules to guide the family in place, then I would start with that and kind of having conversations around where do we see this business going and how long do we want this to go into the future, and do we see multiple generations stepping up over time to carry on the legacy of our family business. And if those are all yes answers, then you definitely have to have a specialist. If you know that it's not going to go to a family member or a management team, where you could maybe do a management buyout or a management buy-in or an ESOP, selling to your employees. Those that I've mentioned, those are all internal transitions. Maybe you know that none of those are on the table for you, or you're not interested and you just want to sell to a third party. Well, if that's the case, then you would want to establish a strong relationship as early as possible with the person I call the deal maker. So if you're a smaller company, then you're going to want to work with a business broker. They need to get to know you. They need to get to know your business. That way, if the relationship is established early, they can make you aware of opportunities that they hear of, or if something happens and you need to take action right away, you've already got that established relationship. Okay. If your business is larger than a Main Street business, say for instance, you're doing more than 5 million a year in revenue, then you're going to maybe want to work with an M&A merger and acquisition intermediary who would work with like lower middle market companies somewhere between 5 and 50 million in revenue. And those thresholds are, sometimes they vary depending on who you're talking to. But again, I think just having the relationship ahead of time, even if you don't know for sure if you're going to go external sale or internal sale, like say it's early on and you're still kind of trying to weigh your options, I think it's super important to not lock yourself in to any specific path right away, because owners change their minds. Mm-hmm. And then usually you need people that can help with the lending side of things. If you're a smaller company, get to know the SBA lenders in your area. Make sure that your commercial insurance policies are up to date and you have the right coverage. So these are other people that would be at the table.
And Julie,
no, it's all right. I was just thinking of other advisors that can also be at the table when we're trying to prepare the business, right? So the two distinctions in exit planning that are important for you to know, for the listener to know, is there's the owner readiness side of exit planning, and then there's the business readiness side. And maybe the owner just has had enough and they just want to be done. And so they think that that's being ready. But it usually means that they're not. Maybe emotionally ready, but otherwise, no. We need to make sure that we've got them covered, and then the business too, right? How well oiled is the machine, and how dependent is it on the owner? We need to reduce owner dependency. Maybe the marketing is fragmented. Maybe we don't have very good team member policies in place, and so we need to get that in order. So then what that means is that sometimes we who work with the owner on the business side, like you said, you work in strategic planning, we're going to bring in some other specialists in different consulting roles that can help us position the business better for the best possible outcome in multiple.
Yeah. And you mentioned something like planning, or like, so any business owner that's now in breakdown about all the things they have to do, right? I find that like a lot of the owners who are like, I'm ready, I'm done, let me sell it like right now, tend, maybe this is a broad generalization, but in my experience, tend to make more of the quote unquote mistakes or rush it through. And it takes time, and they're also working 80 hours a week, 7 days a week, because they're trying to get all their house in order and they weren't prepared. How soon do you like to work with business owners who are thinking about an exit? Even if they're like, I want to do it tomorrow, how do you help them, slow that down a little bit to make sure all their T's are crossed and I's are dotted?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then I don't know that I mentioned earlier what I do. So I'm an exit planner and I help coordinate the team. So I didn't mention, with alongside the attorneys and CPA and financial advisor, I'm usually there kind of helping coordinate the team, and then the internal team as well, like working on the business and all of the, the exit planning steps that need to be taken. I'm sorry, I rambled there and then I forgot what your question was.
That's okay. Just how soon do you recommend they start planning?
Oh yeah,
get
of
through all those
course.
items? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say 2 to 3 years, maybe longer. 2 years minimum. I mean, it's so difficult to make an impact in less than 2 years. But I have had people call me and say, well, I want to sell my company, and I hear that you help people get ready for that. And my answer is, yes, I do. And well, I got a call one time. This seriously happened, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And this guy had seen me speak at an event about exit planning 2 years prior, kept my card, called me, asked me if I remembered him. Of course, I didn't. No, I said it nice, but I was like, no, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Well, he said, I was really impressed. I learned a lot and I'm ready now. I want to sell my company. And it was October when he called and he said, I want to get this done by the end of the year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I said, well, let's get together and meet and talk about your business. And then we'll see what kind of timeline we can help you get through. Well, what happened, the reason why he was in such a hurry is he had a heart attack. And his doctor said, his name was Mark, and his doctor said, Mark, you have to de-stress yourself. Your life is too stressful. You're at risk for another heart attack. And so if it's the business that has to go so that you live longer, because he was only in his 50s.
Oh man.
Yeah. Anyway, 1.5 years later, and we really accelerated the process, and 1.5 years later, he sold the company.
Okay. Well, he distressed, maybe not his timeline, but he distressed, right? Yeah.
He did, yeah.
And so when he came to you, and again, just going back to like the network of advisors versus the DIY, which we started with, how do you I know in your book, Poised for Exit, that you have a story about those who did it DIY and those who use advisors. And this isn't a case necessarily for advisors, but I do want to expand.
Yeah.
Anybody listening who's an owner, like, here's the value of advisors that are out there that can, put you in a much better position pre and post sale.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about the financial side of it, right? And the risk that an owner takes by not having good advisors, because you definitely can, and many times do, leave money on the table when you don't have the right advice or advice at all. This is definitely not a DIY situation. And if you want to make sure that your outcome is optimal financially, by all means, spend the money to, to achieve the best outcome. And aside from that, what we haven't talked about though is what does the next act look like?
Mhm.
And if we haven't thought about that beyond the closing, right, beyond the settlement of what will my life be like, it's really important that you spend time thinking about that and having someone facilitate a conversation, more than one conversation, really. I think it takes a little while. Like what I recommend my clients do is practice.
Mm.
Practice being away,
Mhm.
practice not leading, um, practice delegating, because that isn't anything that you can really do overnight. You can't do it overnight well. So if
Mhm.
something happens, you get in an accident and you can't work, or you're diagnosed with something or whatever, right? Then you don't have a whole lot of time. So if you can practice delegating and teaching other people to do what you do so that you can be away for a while. I'm thinking of one client in particular who had a really hard time being gone for more than a week.
Mhm.
And I said, well, let's not talk about being gone for a month, but that's the ultimate goal. Let's see what it would take for you to be gone for 2 weeks. And so for a couple of years, he and his wife were both in the business, and they practiced being gone for 2 weeks at a time, two times a year, maybe 3 times a year. And then towards the end of our relationship, because it was an internal transition, he was selling to his son, and they've since done that. They did take a month off. They weren't far,
Mhm.
but they were gone for a month, and highly encouraged him not to take calls, return email, or jump into meetings,
Mhm.
unless there was a flaming inferno that he needed to put out. And there weren't any. He was sure that something would happen, that
Yeah.
he would have to step in, but he didn't have to. And so I think that is a good way for owners to gradually realize that they can go do other things and that someone else can lead. But just having that conversation about what's next for me, that definitely takes time. And I think that a lot of the advisors I named before don't necessarily cover that aspect of exit planning because they aren't well trained in those conversations. They're more intangible, right?
Mhm.
Versus the tangible, like the documents and the financials and all of those tangible things where, we're moving, work from here to here, versus the concept of, oh my gosh, how will I remain relevant and productive? What
Right.
does my identity look like, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I like the practice approach because I think, when there's that sudden, like suddenly I'm not the owner of X business and, I get my travel and golf or hobbies and whatnot done. There's a bit of a void there. And I think my experience has been a lot of owners think they're thinking about their
Yeah.
future, but maybe not in enough detail. Like, for example, like day one after I was talking to one business owner, and he's like, day one, I was like, what do I do? And
Yeah.
not that you need to be that granular necessarily, but had definitely just been, looking forward to the business being sold and then kind of knew some now what, but not in detail. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, it reminds me of a story of a business owner that was on a panel that I had assembled for an event for business owners, as part of the Exit Planning Institute chapter that I ran in the Twin Cities. We would have an owners forum every year. We still do, actually. I just don't lead it anymore. But um, we would assemble panels of business owners to tell their story at every single event. And one man said to the owners in the audience, because he had exited his business, he said, I'm going to just give you one piece of advice, and here it is. You need to have a reason to get up in the morning. The day after the settlement of my business, I got up and I didn't have a reason to set my alarm clock. I had nowhere to go. I had no plan and I had nothing to do. And I was scared to death.
Mhm.
Now, that might not apply to everybody, but it certainly applied to him. And I thought it was really good advice. And you can't just plan what you're going to do around the fun stuff that you don't ever have time for because you'll get bored.
Right.
You've been a producing, innovative, hardworking thinker for years. So how can you continue to do that, but do it on your own time, right? So that you're not required to do it. You do it if you want to, but how do you take and transfer that into something else that could still be fulfilling?
Yes.
Not just golfing, hunting, fishing, volunteering, playing with the grandkids. You can have all of that be part of the menu.
Yeah.
But what else is there? Are you going to consult? Are you going to mentor? Are you going to invest your money in donor advised funds? All of those different things. It's important to figure out what really resonates.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. When you mentioned like the donor advised funds, there's a lot of things that people don't know. And this is sort of backwardly circling back around, but just even the case for advisors, I've heard
Yeah.
from a lot of financial advisors, well, they'll get somebody who just sold their business and they have a big pile of cash and they say, help me save on taxes. And they're like, oh, it's a
Too
little late.
late.
I mean, we can do some things, but not nearly as much as we could have
Right.
if you had come to us before.
Yes.
Both a financial advisor or a tax strategist, CPA type, not just the
Absolutely.
balance sheet or whatnot. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's fascinating. So I always use that as a
Mm,
case for that. And then also, I'm curious, just to come back to the what's next. I had a client. They did a really cool thing. They wanted to share their knowledge. They have a lot of wisdom, right? A lot of experience, and
absolutely.
had sold to a bigger company. Had a non-compete for a while, and he got some of his colleagues who were in similar boat, and they just would do like consulting pop-ups that somehow circumnavigated the non-compete and just said for X amount you can come. And so they were able to share their knowledge. People showed up. It was on their time. They just they are still doing it as far as I know and having a great time doing it. I'm curious, like what
Cool.
kind of creative things have you seen your clients do post sale that keeps them with meaning and fulfillment and keeping their identity sound?
Hmm. I think, yeah, I've seen business owners do a lot of volunteering, like intentional volunteering, like say,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, becoming advisors at SCORE and helping
Mm-hmm.
other business owners with, growing their company.
Yep.
And sometimes they get a stipend and sometimes they don't. I've seen owners, say, for instance, one in particular who was in the trades, and a woman, and she really wanted to help other women in her particular trade rise through the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a male dominated industry, it can be really tough to compete for a lot of different reasons, and so she wanted and did become a mentor in her industry, as um, a resource for women in her industry.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
those are just some examples.
and a perfect segue because
Mm,
part of your book, Poised for Exit, is targeted towards specifically the experience of women, which is a little bit different,
mhm.
similar but different than the
Right.
male experience. Do you want to just give a little bit of an overview of like why you wrote the book and why women, and just sort of your perspective on the women's
Mhm.
experience in selling?
Sure. When I was running my own company, and well, I was married at the time, and we had several locations and employees, and I had 4 kids, and we had an office building, and we had a lake home, and I was always running,
Mm-hmm.
doing something, run, 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 right? And and I had friends that also owned companies, and a lot of the similar issues, even different industries, right? But a lot of the same problems that were seemed to be different than they were for men. Well, then when I started business coaching, um, I was meeting men and women owners and realized that it's a common thing for women who own companies to just kind of lose themselves, if you will. Men
Mm-hmm.
probably do too, but men tend to hang on to things that they still like to do, golf or hunt or whatever. They have outlets, most of the time, not always, but most of the time. And women tend to not have any outlets. And so if they don't remain connected to something that gives them meaning outside of raising kids and being a wife and running a house and running a business and, like I said, running, that when the time comes for them to sell, they cling more than men sometimes because it's so much of who they are. Like they're afraid, like, what in the world will I do? Like, how could anybody run the company better than me? I'm the mom of this office, and
Right.
all these different things that I
I can
ran
spin
into.
plates. I can spin plates better than anybody, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they'll never take care of it like I do.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I not only experienced myself, but witnessed in other clients. And so the process of exit planning and everything like that is the same. And it's weird because I have to tell you, over the years since I wrote that book, and it's due for its third edition right now, I have had way more men tell me that they've read that book than women, way more,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, which is strange, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Is that just a matter of like there's more men that own businesses and maybe are ready to sell than women at this point in time?
Yeah, that's
We're just
probably got
a,
something to do with it. That's
yeah,
probably got something to do with it. Yeah.
yeah. Are there do you witness any biases towards women in that when they're selling, or like do they gravitate towards more female advisors, or any, I guess,
Mm.
strengths or pitfalls that women run into more often?
Yeah, I don't know about advisors. I have worked with some who prefer to work with women, but most, I would have to say, don't really have a preference.
Hmm.
They just want to have someone who has their back,
Yeah.
because they know that they don't know, have all the answers. Women tend to reach out and make connections, and ask for help more readily than men do. Um, and they don't want to leave their business in a mess,
Hmm.
because it's kind of like a personal thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they're more prone to have it be ready and well oiled.
Okay.
Yeah, I think where there might be some bias, I shouldn't say might, I believe there is bias, but that's more in startups,
Mm.
and especially when it comes to access to capital.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that that's where women entrepreneurs end up having to bootstrap, because they either aren't connected to the right people where they can access the capital. I'm not talking about grant money where you get,
Yeah.
$500,000 or $200,000. I'm talking about like real money.
Like venture capital, real backing. Hmm.
Right, right. That the connection between the entrepreneurs who have the ingenuity, to grow and scale a company, and the capital to be able to do it. There's a huge disconnect there, which is really unfortunate because when they do connect, the success ratio is so much greater, with women entrepreneurs than it is with men on the investment side. Like the
Hmm.
return on the investment is so much greater and so much faster when they do actually make the connection. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's good. More of that, please, everybody. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody wins when it does happen. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And not specific to women in this case, although it's probably going to sound like it because I'm going to talk about emotions and selling a business. Because I've seen men be perfectly emotional about it as well. And I recently watched it was an interview, and there was a gentleman business owner who was like, "Oh, I'm getting all my finances order in order to remove all emotional, issues before I sell." And
Mhm.
in my mind, I was like, "Well, you're just managing them maybe better. There's always emotions in a sale process."
Mhm.
So one, I'm curious, like the emotions that you see and how you help your clients manage through them. And since we are talking about men and women, if there is a difference in your
Mhm.
counsel between the two.
Um, yeah, I think women tend to identify with how they feel better than men do. Um, but men can, and maybe they're a little bit more afraid of it because they don't as often, which is unfortunate. I think that we just do men a disservice by, and maybe it's not that way anymore, but years ago it was never like manly to cry. And I've noticed, I've just noticed like in my own circles, not necessarily clients, but when men get to be a certain age, things that would never have made them tear up make them tear up.
Mhm.
It's almost like there's a pent up demand for expressing emotion, and those feelings have just got to get out because we've suppressed them for way too long.
Yeah.
And so if a person listening is finding that to be the case, then I would invite you to explore that a little bit more with someone who can help you do that. I don't think that we can do that on our own. I think that it's important to explore that, right?
Yeah.
And just be real with yourself. Let yourself be that. And yeah. And, yeah. So specifically with clients, there was one situation that um, it was really, it wasn't anything we could backpedal out of. Okay. A client who was planning to sell the business and really wanted to do well by his employees and had kind of a hero mentality. You know, some people like to be the hero, and this particular client of mine, who extremely endearing, really enjoyed working with them. But anyway, he told all of his employees, because he loved his company and he loved his employees so much, that they were going to get a certain percentage of the sale of the business. And I couldn't do anything about it because it was already said, but I would have never encouraged him to do that. And I know why he did it, right? Because he really wanted them to have a good future. And he had kind of a hero mentality, but he also really cared about him and realized that they helped him build that company. Now, he should have never thrown out a percentage because he didn't know what his business was worth. He didn't know who the buyer was going to be. He didn't know how much he was even going to need planning wise to maintain his lifestyle going into retirement, because he took my advice very, very slowly. And so a lot of those things hadn't been determined yet. And now they're in the position where they've made a promise that's more than what they can afford to gift.
Yeah. That's an emotional statement, right? I mean, I'm
Extremely.
going to be generous, and this is part of my identity, and not really having thought through. And that's maybe one where could have been avoidable if willing, right? To start to be like, okay, what is this going to look like for me? How do I feel about that? How do I start addressing that? And one thing I tell my clients is like, managing your emotions, or even knowing you have them, examining them, managing them, is a learnable skill. And I agree with you. Men just I don't think had the socialization, there's science around it, you know, that women are just, we grow up more socialized in that way, but it is a learnable skill. And it seems to be somewhat relieving for them, even though, you know, it's still hard, right? Emotions are hard for any gender, right?
Of course. Yeah. Some of them are harder than others.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. So I want to just take a few moments to wrap up here. And I ask everybody, in your experience, if you had to choose 3 words that best capture the business exit process or business owner process from your perspective, what would those be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first word that comes to mind is introspection. And it isn't anything that can happen overnight. That's something that you have to, like you said, we have to practice that, right? So introspection, like taking the time with yourself and then with your spouse or significant other if you're in business together, because you're not going to have the same wants and needs. When I'm working with a married couple, I always ask them, okay, you're going to have different ideas of what exit looks like, and you're going to have different ways and different things that you want to do, and that's okay to have your own individual interests. But how will you be together? And, you know, what does that look like too, right? And so you almost have to take time away to really think about that, and more than one way. And then another word that comes to mind is advisors. Choosing the right advisors. Just because you have a CPA that does your taxes every year does not mean that they're an advisor, and they may not be equipped to be your advisor. Doesn't mean you have to eliminate that relationship, but you probably need an upgrade. Okay. You need a financial advisor. If you haven't got anybody that's helping you with financial planning, and I'm not saying you necessarily have to invest in the capital markets ahead of a sale, but it's not a bad idea, right? To have a partial liquidity event for some owners. But at least have a plan. At least got to have a plan. Okay. Like we talked about before, we don't want to leave money on the table, and we don't want to pay more in taxes than what we need to, right?
Amen.
So then the third word, of course, is planning. So introspection, advisors, and planning.
Those are great. Those are great. So you have written a book, you have a podcast called Poised to Exit as well. Where is the best place for people to find you if they want to know more about you?
Yeah, well, if they're into podcasts, I'm on all of the platforms, Spotify and iHeart and Apple, and that's Poised for Exit and poisedforexit.com, or my website, keystrategies.com, Keye, and then the word strategies.com, or on LinkedIn, just at Julie Keys.
Perfect. That's
Yeah,
wonderful. Thank you for that. And your podcast has over 200 episodes now. I saw actually
yeah,
well over that at this point. So lots of information for people there.
definitely.
Julie, thank you so much for the
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you, Cindy. And thanks to your listeners too.
Yeah. We'll edit this part out. Oh, stop. There we go.